The story begins in the hushed silence of a hospital room, the kind of silence that presses down on the chest, thick with the hum of machines and the faint antiseptic smell of sterilized air. Emma, in her late 20s, lies propped against thin white pillows, her skin pale and clammy from the earlier collapse. Her exhaustion is not just physical but soul deep, the kind that comes from years of carrying unspoken burdens without letting them break her. Her body has finally given out before her spirit has. The dim glow of the monitor reflects off her tired eyes, casting shadows across her gaunt face. On the chair beside her sits Ryan, her boyfriend, early 30s, handsome in a way that draws attention wherever he goes. His suit jacket is draped carelessly over the chair, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, his posture stiff. The room feels smaller, almost suffocating, not just because of Emma's frailty, but because Ryan cannot sit still. His phone buzzes every few minutes, urgent messages, missed calls. Little red notifications lighting up his screen like a beacon of a world outside these walls. He scrolls and types with quick, distracted fingers, his gaze darting to the glowing screen far more often than to the fragile woman lying inches away. The contrast is sharp, Emma clinging to quiet survival, Ryan tethered to ambition and noise. The moment teeters on the edge of intimacy, but distance swallows it whole. The tension cracks when Emma's faint voice breaks the silence, barely more than a whisper, but carrying the weight of everything she has been holding inside. I don't want to go through this alone. It is not a demand, but a confession, a trembling admission that vulnerability terrifies her more than illness ever could. Her words are an invitation, a plea for Ryan to bridge the gulf between them, to prove that love means presence in the darkest hours. For a fleeting moment, she believes he might look up, take her hand, and ease the ache of abandonment pressing at her chest. But Ryan doesn't meet her eyes. Instead, his jaw tightens, his gaze fixed on the floor, as though her words are a burden he cannot bear to acknowledge. He mutters a quiet, clipped, "I'll be back." His tone is casual, almost dismissive, as if stepping out of a hospital room while his girlfriend lies pale and fragile is as routine as leaving a cafe table to take a call. There is no promise in his words, no reassurance, just an escape. He stands, adjusts his sleeves, pockets his phone, and leaves. The door clicks shut with a finality that echoes in Emma's chest, louder than the heart monitor's steady beep. She watches him go, disbelief etched across her tired features, as if her worst fear has been confirmed in the simplest, cruelest of ways. When she asked him to stay, he chose to leave. Time stretches painfully after his departure. The minutes drag, bleeding into hours, until the steady rhythm of the clock becomes a taunting reminder of his absence. Nurses pass by in hushed tones, the soft squeak of shoes marking the only sign of life outside her door. Inside, the room is empty save for Emma's still figure and the chair beside her, but its emptiness growing heavier with each passing hour. She stares at that chair as if willing it to be filled again, as if staring long enough might summon him back. But the reality settles in like a cold hand wrapping around her throat. He's not coming back, not tonight, maybe not at all. The sting of betrayal doesn't arrive as a sharp blow, but as a slow, sinking realization seeping into her bones until she feels hollow. That chair, once a simple piece of furniture, becomes a symbol of abandonment, proof that when her body was at its weakest and her heart most exposed, the man she trusted to be her anchor walked away. Her tears don't fall in dramatic sobs. Instead, they cling stubbornly to the corners of her eyes, a quiet rebellion against the void inside her. In that moment, Emma understands with brutal clarity. Love isn't measured by grand gestures and easy times, but by presence in the hardest. And Ryan has failed her at the very first test. The betrayal cuts deeper than any illness could, because she realizes she has been left alone in the moment she needed him most. The empty chair is no longer just a chair. It is the beginning of the story of her heartbreak. Before, the hospital room stripped her down to weakness. Emma lived a life defined by quiet resilience, the kind of strength that isn't loud but constant. By day, she worked as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm, pouring long hours into projects that never quite matched the compensation she received. Bills stacked like an unending game of Jenga on her kitchen counter rent, utilities, her mother's prescriptions, all teetering but never toppling because Emma refused to let them. Her mother, Nancy, struggled with alcoholism, cycling between fragile moments of sobriety and destructive relapses that left Emma not just a daughter but a caretaker, emotional buffer, and sometimes even parent. That weight wore on her, though she rarely spoke of it aloud. Into this life of fatigue and unshared burdens walked Ryan, charming, ambitious, steady on the surface. He swept her off her feet with promises of stability and the kind of love she had always craved but never received from her fractured family. For a while, Emma believed him, believed that maybe she could let someone else shoulder part of the load, believed that perhaps life wasn't always meant to be survived but lived. She didn't realize then that Ryan's strength was only ever surface deep, that when life demanded he stand firm, his foundation would crack. Emma's past was already riddled with holes before Ryan's absence carved another into her heart. Her father had walked out when she was only 12, leaving her Nancy and Maya to piece together a life that never quite fit again. His departure was a wound that never fully closed, teaching Emma early that love was conditional and fleeting. Nancy's drinking only deepened that truth, each relapse another reminder that even family could choose the bottle over you. Maya, her younger sister, carried the same scars but wore them differently. Where Emma became the dutiful caretaker, holding the crumbling walls together, Maya grew rebellious, pushing against the pain with sharp edges and loud defiance. Yet beneath her stubbornness, she loved Emma fiercely enough to voice the uncomfortable truths Emma didn't want to face. More than once, Maya had told her, "You pick men who run. Just like Dad, just like Mom. You think you're choosing love, but you're choosing the same story again and again." Emma hated hearing it, but Maya wasn't wrong. The curse of abandonment ran through their lives like an invisible thread, binding their fears together even as it drove them apart. Emma told herself Ryan was different, that he would stay where others had left. Now, lying in a hospital bed replaying his absence, she realized Maya's words weren't an accusation, they were prophecy. In the days following her collapse, Emma's body began to heal, but her spirit carried fresh bruises. She avoided Ryan's calls, not because she didn't want answers, but because she already knew them. Each buzz of her phone was another reminder of the empty chair by her bedside, another echo of the words she had whispered, "I don't want to go through this alone," and his choice to walk away. Her friends reached out, offering food, rides, comfort, but Emma brushed them off with polite refusals. Independence had become her armor, a shield against the shame of needing anyone who might not stay. She convinced herself she could manage, the same way she managed bills, her mother's spirals, her father's absence, Maya's recklessness. But beneath that determination lingered a quieter fear. What if Maya was right? What if Emma had learned only how to repeat cycles instead of breaking them? The theme of her life, trust versus abandonment, pulsed louder now, demanding confrontation. Would she let Ryan's betrayal confirm the curse she had always believed? And that people leave, or would she finally write a new story for herself? For the first time, Emma began to understand that survival wasn't enough. She would have to decide whether she was willing to keep living under the shadow of loss or to fight, however clumsily, toward a future where trust might not mean disappointment. The hospital may have weakened her body, but it planted the seed of a harder, more vital question. Could she learn to stay for herself, even when no one else did? Emma's first day back at work after the hospital was meant to be ordinary, a quiet step toward normalcy. She slipped into her cubicle, still pale but determined, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over her keyboard. For hours, she tried to lose herself in design drafts, in the safety of lines and colors that didn't demand anything personal. But then, during her coffee break, she overheard two colleagues whispering near the vending machine. "Did you hear Ryan left the firm?" Just like that, resigned without notice. Another voice chimed in, hushed but laced with curiosity. "Saw him at that bar on Fifth, too." "Not alone?" "Some woman was with him. Looked close." The word struck like a physical blow, knocking the air from Emma's lungs. She froze, the styrofoam cup in her hand trembling, hot coffee nearly spilling onto her fingers. They didn't notice her standing just feet away, silent and stunned, their gossip confirming what her gut had feared since the hospital night. Ryan hadn't just been distracted. He had already chosen another life, another woman, another escape. The image of his back leaving her hospital room replayed in her head, but now it carried sharper meaning. He hadn't left to clear his head. He had left because he was already gone. The buzzing in her ears drowned out their voices as the truth settled like a knife in her chest. Ryan hadn't simply abandoned her in a moment of weakness. He had erased her altogether, slipping out of her world with the ease of someone who had practiced leaving. That evening, determined to confront him and demand answers, Emma rushed back to their shared apartment, the place that once felt like a safe harbor after long days. But when she unlocked the door, what greeted her was not home but devastation. The rooms were stripped bare, his presence erased with surgical precision. Drawers gaped open, emptied. The closet on his side hung hollow, only wire hangers left behind like skeletons. The bookshelf that once carried his business manuals and motivational guides now bore only dust. Worse, the kitchen counter was cluttered with unopened envelopes rent overdue, utility bills stacked high, the weight of their shared responsibilities dumped squarely on her shoulders. He hadn't just walked away from her emotionally. He had vanished physically, leaving wreckage in his wake. Emma staggered into the living room, the sound of her heartbeat roaring in her ears. On the coffee table, a few receipts were scattered dinners, hotel stays, all recent, none of them with her. The betrayal was complete. Ryan hadn't been her anchor. He had been a parasite, taking until there was nothing left, then vanishing without looking back. Emma collapsed onto the couch, staring at the emptiness, her hands gripping the fabric, as if it could keep her from falling apart. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was theft, abandonment, and the cruel revelation that the life she thought they were building together had been nothing but scaffolding around a hollow core. She had been left not only alone, but carrying the burdens he had fled from. The next day, Emma turned to the only person who might understand Maya. She sat across from her sister at their favorite diner, her voice raw as she recounted the apartment, the gossip, the bills. Maya listened quietly at first, her rebellious energy subdued, until finally she leaned forward, her eyes flashing with the blunt honesty Emma had both dreaded and depended on. Maya said, her tone sharp but not unkind. He was never planning to stay. Can't you see that? He used you until you weren't useful anymore. The words landed harder than the empty apartment, harder than the whispered rumors. Emma flinched, shaking her head, clinging to scraps of denial. But Maya pressed on, unwilling to let her sister romanticize betrayal. He saw you holding everything together, your job, Mom, even him, and he leaned on you until he didn't need to anymore. Then he walked, just like Dad. Silence fell heavy between them, but the truth hung there, undeniable. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to see Ryan not as the man she had fallen for, but as another chapter in a cycle of abandonment that had defined her life. Tears pricked her eyes, not from grief alone, but from the devastating clarity that Maya's words forced on her. The inciting incident was not just Ryan's disappearance, but the collapse of her illusions. Betrayal was now her reality, and independence was no longer a choice, but a demand. In that diner booth, as Maya reached across to take her hand, Emma understood her old life was gone, and whether she was ready or not, she would have to face the ruins alone. In the weeks that followed Ryan's disappearance, Emma's world shrank to survival. Days blurred together under the weight of overdue bills, mounting exhaustion, and the sharp edge of distrust that now colored every interaction. Even the simplest acts, answering a text from a friend, returning a call from work, felt like a test she wasn't sure she could pass. When she visited her mother, Nancy, the emotional weight doubled. Nancy had a way of speaking that cut Emma down while pretending to build her up, a toxic cycle Emma had known her whole life. On one particularly tense evening, as Emma sat across from her mother's cluttered kitchen table, Nancy leaned back with a glass of wine in hand and said with a sigh, "You're just like me, Em. Men always leave us. It's in our blood." The words sank like stones into Emma's chest, heavy and suffocating. Nancy's tone carried both defeat and accusation, as if Emma's heartbreak was less tragedy and more inheritance. For the first time, Emma felt truly afraid, not just of Ryan's betrayal, but of the possibility that her mother was right. That abandonment wasn't just a pattern in her life, but a curse stitched into her very being. She left that night with her mother's voice echoing in her ears, the words fusing with her own worst fears. The isolation deepened, not just physical, but existential, as Emma wondered whether her life would always mirror Nancy's, shadowed by loss and men who disappeared. Maya, however, refused to let Emma sink quietly into despair. She confronted her sister with a raw urgency that only deepened their tension. Over coffee in Emma's tiny kitchen, Maya gestured toward the stack of unpaid bills and snapped, "You can't keep doing this, Em. Mom is dragging you down, and now Ryan's done the same. You have to cut ties before she ruins you." Emma bristled, her jaw tightening as she folded her arms defensively. "You don't get it," she shot back. "She's our mother. She's sick. I can't just walk away like you always do." The argument flared like a wildfire, years of unspoken resentment fueling every word. Maya accused Emma of martyrdom, of carrying burdens that weren't hers to bear. "You think suffering makes you strong, but all it does is trap you." Emma, stung, hurled her own accusations in return. "At least I don't run every time things get hard. You act like walking away is noble, but it's just cowardice." The sisters' words clashed in the small space until silence finally fell, leaving them both shaken. Beneath the anger was a painful truth. They were two sides of the same wound. Maya's rebellion was as much a reaction to abandonment as Emma's loyalty, but neither could admit it without tearing open scars too raw to face. Their bond, though loving at its core, strained under the weight of grief, guilt, and the unspoken terror that maybe neither of them truly knew how to break free from the family's cycle of loss. At night, when the world fell silent and even Maya's harsh truths couldn't reach her, Emma's emotions spiraled into ritual. She sat at her small desk, pen poised over blank paper, and wrote letters she never intended to send. Some were drenched in rage. "You left me with nothing but your mess. Do you know what that feels like?" Others ached with longing. "I keep waiting for the door to open, for you to tell me this was a mistake." The pages filled with contradictions, anger battling grief, love tangled with betrayal. But the longer she wrote, the more a painful clarity began to emerge. She wasn't longing for Ryan himself. She was mourning the man she thought he was, the version of him that had promised safety and love, the anchor she desperately wanted to believe in. That man had never truly existed outside her hopes. The letters became less about him and more about her own reckoning. her need to understand why she kept clinging to illusions that dissolved the moment she needed them most. Yet each morning, when she tucked the letters into a drawer, she told herself they were nothing but words. Still, the truth was undeniable. The act of writing them was peeling back the layers of her denial, forcing her to confront not just Ryan's betrayal, but the emptiness within herself that had allowed her to believe in him. The letters weren't for Ryan anymore, they were for Emma, and each one inched her closer to a realization she wasn't ready to face. If she was ever going to heal, she would have to stop waiting for someone else to save her. It happened on a night when Emma least expected it. She had just settled into the couch, a half-finished letter crumpled on the coffee table, when a sharp knock rattled the apartment door. Her chest tightened as if her body already knew who it was. When she opened the door, Ryan stood there, hair slightly disheveled, eyes pleading, his usual polished confidence replaced with something rawer, though Emma couldn't tell if it was genuine or practiced. He said softly, his voice carrying a weight of false tenderness. I panicked. That night in the hospital, I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't ready for your weakness. I needed freedom. The words cut like glass, his confession wrapped in self-pity rather than remorse. Emma stood frozen, her mind a battlefield of rage and heartbreak. The man she had once trusted enough to build a future with was standing in front of her, asking for another chance as though absence and betrayal could be undone with a few rehearsed lines. Her throat tightened, 1,000 retorts fighting to escape, but no words came. She could only stare at him, stunned, as the weight of everything he had done, his abandonment, the empty apartment, the bills, the silence pressed down on her like a tidal wave. For a fleeting moment, she saw the version of herself who might have begged him to stay, who might have swallowed her pain in exchange for the illusion of love. But that version was already dying, and Ryan's presence was the final blow. Before Emma could respond, a second voice pierced the tension. Maya, who had come over earlier to check on her sister, stepped out from the hallway, her expression a storm of anger and vindication. Don't listen to him, Em, Maya snapped, her eyes locked on Ryan like daggers. He's lying. He wasn't scared. He wasn't confused. He's been living with her for months long before the hospital, long before he left. Emma's breath caught, her gaze flicking between her sister's furious certainty and Ryan's paling face. That's not true, Ryan began, but his stammering denial only confirmed what Maya had said. The floor seemed to vanish beneath Emma's feet. Every unanswered text, every late night at the office, every moment he'd seemed distracted suddenly, all aligned into a cruel, undeniable truth. He hadn't abandoned her because of fear or weakness. He had abandoned her because he had already chosen someone else. Her stomach twisted, nausea rising as the last of her denial crumbled. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not the man she had fallen for, but the coward who had betrayed her long before. She even realized she was fighting for a ghost. The truth, though devastating, was also strangely clarifying. Ryan's excuses, his pleading eyes, his sudden return, none of it held power anymore. The man she had been writing letters to never existed. He had been a mirage built from lies, and now, finally, Emma saw through it. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Emma finally found her voice. It shook at first, but steadied as she spoke, her words carrying years of swallowed pain. The night you walked away, she said, her gaze fixed on Ryan, I almost begged you to stay. I thought losing you would break me. But tonight, her voice rose, stronger now, trembling with release. Tonight, I'm glad you left. Ryan blinked, stunned, as if the script in his head had just been torn apart. He opened his mouth, but Emma didn't let him speak. She stepped back, her hand firm on the door, and with a final resolute push, she closed it in his face. The click of the lock echoed through the apartment like a closing chapter. Emma pressed her forehead against the wood, her body trembling. not with weakness, but with the adrenaline of release. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't the same desperate tears she had cried into her letters. These were tears of catharsis, of finally letting go of the illusion that had bound her. Behind her, Maya placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and silent. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to feel the strength of her own choice. The cycle of abandonment hadn't ended with Ryan's return. It ended with her refusal to let him stay. In that moment, Emma understood that betrayal could still be a gift, not because it didn't hurt, but because it forced her to finally choose herself. The first real step toward healing came not with Ryan, but with Nancy. One Sunday afternoon, Emma visited her mother's apartment as she had countless times before. The kitchen reeked faintly of stale alcohol, though Nancy had tried to cover it with a scented candle flickering weakly on the counter. For years, Emma had cleaned bottles, made excuses, and shouldered the weight of her mother's spirals. But this time, as Nancy poured herself another drink and muttered, "You'll end up just like me. Men always leave us." "It's who we are." Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she placed the glass firmly on the table, her voice steady but firm. "No, Mom, that's who you chose to be." "I don't have to repeat it." Nancy blinked, surprised, unused to her daughter's refusal. For a moment, anger sparked in her eyes, but beneath it, there was something else, fear, maybe even shame. Emma didn't wait for permission. She stood, gathering her things, and added, "I'll always love you, but I can't keep saving you while you destroy yourself. If you want me in your life, you have to meet me halfway." For the first time, Emma left without guilt dragging at her heels. The decision didn't erase her mother's flaws, but it shifted the balance. Emma had finally set a boundary, one that gave her space to heal instead of repeating Nancy's cycles. With Nancy at a distance, Emma found herself turning more toward Maya, whose love had always been fierce, even when buried under arguments. One evening, the sisters sat together on Emma's balcony, sharing takeout cartons, the city glowing beneath them. This time, there was no shouting, no accusations. Instead, Emma admitted softly, "You were right about him. And maybe about me too. I thought holding everything together was strength, but maybe it was just fear of letting go." Maya smirked, nudging her shoulder. "And I thought running was the only way to survive." Guess we both had it wrong. The exchange cracked something open between them, not blame, but understanding. They were different in how they coped, but they needed each other, both as reminders and as anchors. Emma also took steps for herself outside of family. She began therapy, sessions where she unraveled her patterns of abandonment and slowly learned to replace self-blame with self-compassion. In her free time, she poured emotions into her art, sketching and journaling, her pain transforming into shapes and colors that felt less like scars and more like expressions. Each page she filled, each session she attended, was proof that she was not just surviving anymore. She was rebuilding, this time not out of necessity, but out of choice. Independence was no longer a cage, it was a canvas. The most defining moment came on a quiet Saturday morning. Emma gathered the last of Ryan's forgotten belongings, an old sweater, a few stray books, a mug he claimed as his, and placed them neatly into a cardboard box. She set it outside her door without ceremony, shutting it firmly behind her. For once, the act wasn't bitter but liberating. The apartment, once haunted by his absence, now felt like hers to reclaim. She opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight spill into corners that had long felt dim. She bought plants, small succulents, a tall fern, a climbing vine that she placed near the window. Their slow, steady growth mirrored her own, each green sprout a testament to resilience. She rearranged the furniture, hung up artwork of her own making, and filled the silence with soft music that soothed instead of reminded. Where there had once been emptiness, now there was warmth and light. Standing in the middle of her living room, Emma breathed deeply, the air different, somehow lighter, freer. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined her. Ryan's absence no longer loomed. It had created space for her to choose herself, to choose life on her own terms. She touched one of the leaves of her new plant and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel abandoned. She felt present. She felt whole. Months had passed since Ryan's return and Emma's decision to close the door on him. Months that had felt both endless and fleeting. Seasons had shifted, the leaves outside turning from green to gold, the air sharp with the first hint of winter. On a soft gray morning, Emma sat by the window of a small cafe, her sketchbook open beside her steaming mug of coffee. The page in front of her was half filled with loose pencil-lined shapes that hinted at flowers, at growth, at life. She paused, her gaze drifting to the people passing by on the street. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't watching for someone who wasn't coming back. She was simply watching life unfold. She reached for her journal, its worn leather cover warm beneath her hands, and wrote carefully, each word a truth carved from pain. The night he walked away, I thought I'd never breathe again. Now, I see it was the night I was finally set free. As she set her pen down, she realized she meant it not as defiance, not as a mask, but as a quiet acknowledgement of what she had survived. The emptiness Ryan had left had once felt unbearable, but it had forced her into a confrontation with herself, a reckoning that had led her here, steady, scarred, but stronger than she had ever known. Emma closed the journal and wrapped her hands around her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her palms. Healing hadn't been a clean arc, it had been messy, with nights when she so woke from dreams of his voice, mornings when the weight of bills or her mother's struggles threatened to drag her back into despair. But the difference now was choice. She no longer mistook suffering for destiny. She no longer equated abandonment with proof of her worth. Therapy sessions had given her the language to untangle her fears. Maya's stubborn love had shown her that family could mean standing by each other even when it hurt. She had learned to create boundaries with Nancy, to say no without drowning in guilt. And most importantly, she had found herself again in the act of creating and sketching, in journaling, in planting little green shoots that thrived under her care. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something she could carry without breaking. She was still healing, but she no longer defined herself by wounds. Looking down at her sketchbook, Emma realized she wasn't documenting loss anymore. She was recording growth. When she finally gathered her things, slipping her sketchbook and journal into her bag, Emma stepped outside. The clouds above, thick and heavy all morning, had begun to part, a soft beam of sunlight spilling onto the wet pavement. She tilted her face toward it, closing her eyes briefly as the warmth touched her skin. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of victory in her chest, but she felt steady. And steady was enough. She had thought once that being abandoned meant being broken, but now she understood that solitude was not emptiness. It was space, and she had filled that space with herself. With her art, her words, her choices. As she walked down the street, the sun breaking through behind her, Emma carried no illusions of a perfect future. Healing would continue, uneven and imperfect. But for the first time, she knew she was no longer defined by who left her or who stayed. She had herself, and that was enough.